Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Josh. I'm really happy to be here.
Now, we get started talking a little bit before this, and you showed me your coffee mug. So we need to
Hmm.
start here. So show
Yes,
everybody watching. Okay, Dunder Mifflin,
yes. This is
fantastic show.
world's best
World,
boss.
world's best boss. So I got to ask you, did you buy that for yourself or
No,
did you get it gifted?
my husband and Workplaceless Chief Revenue Officer, Brian Stutzman, gave this to me. We both love The Office, and now I am technically his boss. He joined the team in January, and so this was a birthday gift to me.
I love it. I love it. Well, it suits you. It suits you because we've had a chance to meet before at a recent conference, and just really excited about what you have going on with Workplaceless. So let's start there. What are you doing with Workplaceless? What's your reason for existence, and who do you want to help?
Yeah, so our mission is to positively impact both the supply and demand of remote work. So we do that through providing training to workers, leaders, and executives on how to thrive in a distributed environment. So we are primarily a training company, and we offer self-paced e-courses as well as live virtual workshops.
It's fantastic. I know in a lot of the work that you've done preparing to this point, you've gathered a lot of statistics just about kind of like the velocity at which the remote model is moving. So I don't want to put you on the spot, but even just in general round numbers, what are some of the trends that you're seeing just in terms of how people are adopting remote work as a model, both on the company side and I guess the employee side?
Yeah, so one of the most interesting things that I think about when we're talking about the availability of remote work and why it's so important to us for us to focus on sustainability is that there are very few remote jobs available. So it's, like 3% of jobs are advertised as remote friendly. And yet like 98% of people want to work remotely. And so there's a really big disconnect there because if companies are not advertising those jobs as flexible, the candidates might not identify those roles as roles that are appropriate for them. And so as that divide grows, what's happening with organizations is they're not able to really access the talent pool that they need. And then for individuals, it's very frustrating because they can't get those flexible roles that they want.
Definitely. Definitely. Yeah. So there is this massive transition, this wave of transition that appears to be happening where there's a rush to meet, I guess, the supply and demand curve out
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And it is really interesting that many people report working from home at least once a week. So it's not that remote work isn't as prevalent as we want it to be. It's that
Mhm.
companies are very hesitant to promote that piece of their opportunities to the world,
Hmm.
and there's some potential reasons for that we could get into, or if you want to go in a different
Yeah,
direction, we
no,
could do
let's
that.
let's do that. Yeah, let's unearth some of
Yeah.
the hesitancy or the reluctance that companies have to make the transition. I think that'd be a great place to start.
Yeah, I think there is number one, going remote can be really a challenging process because it is going to involve HR getting involved and actually developing a remote work policy. And because it has the potential to impact everybody, and really it should impact everybody, because if you have a remote work policy, it should be made available to the majority of people in an organization. But when you start changing the fundamental ways that an organization works, then that's going to involve a pretty involved process, and also those policies that go along with making sure that what you're doing is taking into account the rights of your employees, as well as the regulations that that guide your industry or your particular organization. So there's that piece, the compliance piece, which is a
Hmm.
huge thing. And then there's also the perception piece. So companies are worried that their clients are not going to perceive their organization as serious. There's also the belief that remote employees don't work as hard or they're not as productive as their co-located teammates. So there's that perception piece that's really a block as well. And we like to define the three areas where there are barriers, are really opportunities for organizations to learn more and to be, approach remote work from a different way. And so we define those three areas as infrastructure, mindset, and education. And so with the policy that I mentioned, that's that infrastructure. So it's a challenge for organizations, but also that's really where you set the groundwork for creating a policy that is sustainable. And then mindset deals with all of those perception issues that I just mentioned. And then education is what ties everything together and provides opportunities to learn about remote work as well as the best ways to do it.
That's fantastic. So for people that are thinking about making the transition, like what are some of the qualities of companies or clients of yours who have made that transition successfully? Is there kind of a common thread amongst, I guess, the management team or the founders, whoever maybe the main stakeholders are, but like, is there something that you can spot and you can just say like from the first call, oh yeah, you're going to be a great fit. Like you should definitely move forward with this and, use our frameworks to make the jump.
Yeah, I think any culture that is open and prioritizes providing opportunities for involvement and for people to speak their minds and share their beliefs. I think any culture that has a really open and transparent culture, that's a pretty good indicator that remote work is going to be, a viable solution for them. The red flags for us are those organizations that, don't have a very transparent culture, and information is really siloed, and people are also a little bit afraid, or they don't trust each other, and they're really afraid that if they transition to remote or if their employees transition to remote, then bad things will happen. So obviously a little healthy dose of fear is helpful for anyone because that helps you look at situations from all angles and allows you to prepare better. But when fear comes from lack of trust, that's a real red flag for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's probably a good red flag for a lot of different things, right? Like it reminds me, I remember speaking to a CEO maybe 5-6 years ago. It was a while ago, and he instituted like a results-oriented work environment where it wasn't quite remote. It was just more people making their own schedule. And he realized that he ended up having to lay off like a third of his staff. And actually many of them left voluntarily because they realized that they didn't even really have a full-time job. Like there's so much waste built into their daily workflow that they just, they didn't want to take on more. And so it wasn't a good fit. So I almost wonder if like considering a transition to remote is actually not a bad temperature check, to see where the health of your organization is.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's plenty of resources out there that can help organizations figure that out. So we have a remote readiness assessment, and then one of our partners is a consulting firm that does, a health check for an organization, which is really, really helpful in identifying what are those barriers that are specific to your organization and how can you overcome them.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, because I think people have different viewpoints on this, but, a lot of folks say, hey, it should be all or nothing with remote. Like don't have some people, co-located, don't have some people, in the distributed model. What's your take on that? Like, is it feasible? Should it be avoided at all costs? Is a hybrid model viable? What's your take?
Yeah, I hesitate to be really prescriptive about work models because I think one of the benefits of remote work is that it really is a model of flexibility. And so I think in the modern workplace, that's really like the common thread. And so I don't think that it's helpful to say you should do either be all or nothing. What I do think is that the employee experience should be consistent across the board. So if you do have some employees that work from home or are remote workers, you need to make sure that the experience that they have is the same as the experience of people who are co-located. And what that usually means is that those people who are located in the office, they need to be working as if they are remote. So prioritizing using the channels that remote workers have to use. So instead of like walking down the hallway and saying, hey, let's just really quickly meet about this one topic. Because if you allow yourself to do that with the people that are around you, you're automatically excluding the people who are working remotely. And so it just takes intentionality on the part of people who are working in a co-located environment to think and act as if they are also working remotely, because that empathy is what keeps that experience really consistent across the board.
It's brilliant. Yeah, that's a great answer. I think it's actually a great segue into kind of my culture question, which I love to ask every guest, is just, you're in a unique position, right, where you're working with a lot of different companies and seeing kind of how they're progressing. So what are some of the ways that you personally, kind of within your own company, go about, building a culture with a remote workforce? And then how have you seen some of your clients go about that and really win?
Yeah, well, very timely question, Josh, because we literally just had a team meeting where we developed our culture canvas. So
Awesome.
that's a tool that we provide to our clients, and we hadn't done it internally yet. So we worked on that today. And what that means is we share our ideas of our mission, our core purpose, and then under your culture, it's really divided into two categories. So what's your culture's character and what is its personality? And the character we define as including your values, so your beliefs that drive the mission, and then behaviors. So what do you do on a daily basis that reflect those values? And then on the personality side, you have the attitudes. So like attitudes and traits that you expect from your team members, and rituals. So what are the things that you do on a daily, weekly, regular basis that demonstrate the commitment to those attitudes and traits? So examples would be like transparency is a value that's really important to us. And the behaviors would be, really openly sharing feedback. But that's not really super concrete, right? Because we all want to do feedback. What are the rituals that actually make us and demonstrate that commitment to that value and that behavior? And so for us, it's, internally we have internal blogs where we share information on updates on projects as well as how we're feeling, and invite feedback through those blogs. And we also invite feedback through various other channels. And so, just making sure that the values that we say that we have, making sure that that's actually visible and observable in our culture, because in remote work, you have to look for it, right? It has to be there because it's not something that's just going to exist like in the office and something that you can just see passing by. Like you have to look for it, and it has to be really consistent. Again, so some of these words just keep popping up over and over again. But that is one of the activities that we do with clients. So we have two programs that involve culture, and we just did that in our team. And really, it was an excellent conversation. And then we have a follow-up meeting next month to talk about the concrete things that we're going to be doing to improve culture.
I love that. I think I wanted to highlight a couple of things that you said. I think one is just that, culture is going to happen one way or the other, right? It's more about how much control and how much intentionality do you want to have behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right to say, like with remote, it's not, it can be a challenge because you have to be more intentional. But that's also the blessing, is that you have to be more intentional. So it almost, I guess, requires you to be a proactive builder of culture and define some of the things that you talked about, like attitudes, actions, like the behaviors. That's all kind of like, in sum, what creates your culture. And being forced to be more intentional about that is actually a good thing. But I love that you have a system to formulate that. It's awesome.
Yeah. providing a framework is really helpful, especially when you're talking about concepts that are a little bit more abstract. And I feel like culture tends to fall into that category. So people sort of have a good idea of what good culture is. They really know what bad culture is. So
Right.
I just did a workshop on culture at Nomad City in Spain last week. And the opening icebreaker question I had people talk about was, have you ever had an experience with a toxic work culture? Like, explain what that was like. And everybody had something to say.
Yep.
I
Yep.
think we all know what bad culture is. It's just a question of really articulating and being concrete about what good culture is and how we can actually achieve it. That's the hard part.
Let's take that angle for a second. So I think it's easy for people to recall like what a toxic culture looks like and maybe their own career history or their own path. What are some examples of toxic culture that manifest in a remote model? Like what are some, because I think it might manifest itself a little bit differently. So what are some of the ways that you might be able to detect, hey, we're maybe moving the wrong direction with our remote team?
Yeah. One really good, not good, but one really important red flag to watch out for, and it can be challenging, but gossip and like back channel talk. So that's one thing to watch out for, because if people are talking about other people when they're not there, that's not a good sign. And actually, one of the case studies in our courses, Belay virtual assistants, they have a policy that requires you, if you are going to talk about someone, they have to be there. So there's absolutely no talking about other people, and that needs to be expressly articulated, because it can very easily happen where you talk about other people because they're literally not there. Like, you're the only person in your office.
Right.
So that's one thing to watch for. And then disengagement is a really, it happens all the time, because if the organization is, and a role is more task-based, like you just get really, really involved in your tasks and you don't take that time to really connect with your teammates. And that can be a personal choice, but it can also be an indicator that there's something lacking in the culture that allows for those connections. And so that could be, only allowing or prioritizing productivity over anything else, and not allowing team members to spend time just connecting with each other if it's not, directly benefiting like an end goal or
Yeah.
productivity goal anyway. And then not allowing like interdepartmental or cross functional communication and connections.
Mm-hmm.
Those are just a couple examples of, if you're not allowed, or if you feel like you don't have the time or the resources to really connect with your teammates, that's a pretty good indicator that those connections aren't valued. And to me, that's the whole point of culture, is enabling those connections that make you feel valued as a person and make your work feel valued.
Definitely. Yeah. It's again, it's one of those blessing and curse moments where everything's very efficient, in a distributed model where everything is just like focused on the task. There's not a ton of meetings usually, but that means a lot of the communication can end up being transactional and then miss out on that more relational point that you're bringing up. And I think you said something really well, which is just making space for one another. Or I don't know exactly how you said it off the roll back the tape, but effectively you're saying like, how do you make time for one another outside of the transactional nature of the work? What are some of the ways that you've seen that done well, versus kind of like a more cheesy icebreaker type of moment? Like, what are some of the more organic, natural ways that you've observed teams making space for each other and making sure that there's deeper connections relationally versus just the transactional language?
Yeah, well, in our team, we have informal coffee break / because we're across time zones, so it's like some sort of beverage / meal. So, if it's coffee for someone on the West Coast, then it's dinner for someone in Europe. But times where you meet together, but you don't talk about work, you talk about all sorts of other stuff. So we usually talk about a lot of podcast recommendations.
Nice.
Different holiday stuff. So, the last one that we had was around Halloween. And so we talked about different, Halloween costumes and things like that. So that's been really effective for our team. For other teams, one of the teams that I was on a couple of years ago, it was a pretty large remote team. So there's around 50 people. And one of the really fun things that they did was like a water cooler barrage of questions, basically. So after every weekly check-in, you would pick one person to be in the hot seat, and people would ask as many questions as they could. And so you just had to answer as many as you could.
I
But
love that.
it was a really nice way to get to know somebody that you don't directly work with. Because once you start having multiple teams, I worked in content, so I didn't really talk much with the development team. And so it was a nice way to, get to know somebody and identify some commonalities, because then I could reach out on Slack and say, oh, hey, like I also really love The Office, for instance, and
Right.
then,
Right.
bond over that.
Yeah, no, that's so important. I think it's just that what is it? So one of my guests, Ryan Cooter, he had mentioned, what they focus on in Techstars with the Techstars Anywhere program is to create this manufactured serendipity, which is like
Mm-hmm.
creating focused times where stuff can just happen, right? It's like you're trying to mimic, that kind of in-person moment where somebody has a eureka moment. They're saying, hey, what if we tried? So like creating enough space for that to happen. And sometimes it's asynchronous. Like you're saying, you might have somebody in Europe, you might have somebody in the West Coast. That's a pretty big gap for them to overlap in a meaningful way.
Mm-hmm.
So just, to give some specifics, at least from my end too, it's like the Slack channels that are dedicated to non-work things, right? Like just the small places where you can carve out space is just so huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like that term, manufactured serendipity.
Yeah, that'll preach for sure. That'll
Mm-hmm.
preach. So a big part of what you do is obviously you guys are providing a framework, you're providing a method to the madness, helping people make that transition. I imagine that you all evaluate quite a bit of tools when recommending how a company can move forward. So what are some of the essentials? Again, not to be over prescriptive, but just in your experience, what are some of the things that people should be thinking about including in their tech stack or adopting if they already currently are running remote?
Yeah, we really like to talk about categories of tools, and to really invite organizations and teams to think about the why before choosing a tool.
Mhm.
Because I think in this marvelous age where there's a new app for everything, it can be very easy to get distracted by bells and whistles and, a new tool that just got, 200 million in funding or something like that.
Yep.
But in the end, like for many, many teams, the basics are all really that you need. And really the focus needs to be on developing a process. So a communications process and developing a communications agreement or charter so that everyone knows exactly what tool they should be using for what reason. And so that's something that we prioritize and we recommend that organizations really consider, because focusing on the tool itself is sometimes, putting the cart before the horse, or sometimes you're really missing an opportunity to address a problem that could grow even if you do invest in a new tool. But that being said, we do love video collaboration tools. So we have Zoom, and then we really love a tool called Whereby, which I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's a
I'm not, no.
it's a browser-based video conferencing tool. And so what's nice about Whereby is that actually there's two really cool things about it. So one, you don't have to download anything to use it. So when you're meeting with clients or you're meeting with people that you're not sure if they have Zoom or WebEx or whatever, doesn't matter. If they have a browser, they can use Whereby. So that's really nice because it's really easy to use. Second thing, which is super cool, is that we use Google Docs for a lot of collaboration. And the cool thing about Whereby is you can edit a Google Doc directly in the shared screen. So instead of
Ooh,
having to open another browser window and edit on that browser window, you can do it directly in the shared screen in Whereby,
oh,
which
that's cool.
to me is like magic. Like, cause I don't
Yeah.
have that tech background to understand even how that works. And like, that's like interacting with someone and like shaking their hand through the screen to me
Yeah.
almost. It's like,
What is
how do
this
you do that?
voodoo? Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, those are a couple of things that that are really cool for that. And then we use Slack. We use Asana for project management. But really, I think the categories are for remote teams, like you need some sort of video collaboration tool. You
Mhm.
need some sort of communication that your whole team agrees to primarily use for certain kinds of communication. And whether that's just email, that might just be email. And then document collaboration and idea collaboration. And
Mhm.
depending on your industry, that could be like Google Docs or Dropbox or something.
Mhm.
Or if you're a more visual organization, it could be something like Mural, but something that you can visually and synchronously collaborate.
Mhm.
That's really important because in most remote teams, speed and also speed is an issue, as well as making sure that the information that you have access to is the same for everybody. And that's why synchronized information and updated information is really critical. So,
Mhm.
somebody sends me like a Word document, it's just like version 20. I just don't even know what to do with that anymore. Um, you know, so those are some of the main categories that we recommend.
That's fantastic. Those are great recommendations. I'm going to check out Whereby as well. That's
Mhm.
really, really fantastic. So one thing that I know can be self-defeating in the remote model is people's lack of boundaries for themselves when it comes to work and forming kind of healthy habits and, ironically creating a better work-life balance, which you'd
Yeah.
think would be more of a default, but in our experience, it hasn't been that way. So what are some of the ways that you and your team or your clients have just found ways to kind of set healthy boundaries and kind of, I guess, yeah, present that to your team so they're adopting it too?
Yeah. Yeah. And that is also really top of mind because and I don't know if I'm like the best person to respond because I'm also a founder, and I feel
Right.
like I'm getting better about setting boundaries and limiting the amount of time that I work. But certainly, up until this point, it's been really, really challenging to set those boundaries because
Hmm.
I I feel and I am, responsible for this company. And so that's, a large weight. So all that to say, some of the best strategies for setting and maintaining boundaries, I think, are um, oh gosh, there's a lot. So one of the things that I've been doing is I've been scheduling emails. So I actually have been really good about not working on weekends. So I am
Nice.
going to give myself a pat on the back. And it's like there have even been a couple of weekends where I've shared with my team, I was like, I didn't open my laptop once. And that's very strange for me. So, but on times that I am working on the weekends, I try to schedule emails. If I'm writing them, I try to schedule them to go out on Monday so that nobody needs to know that I'm working on the weekend. And also, I don't want anyone to feel like they need to respond to me on the weekend. And I think
Yep.
that's where my responsibility as a founder and a leader is really prevalent because, or really important because, I'm setting that standard and I'm setting that model. And if I'm working on the weekend and if I'm responding after hours and doing all these things, there's no way that I'm going to be able to expect my team to set and keep those boundaries. If,
Yeah.
because people model what they see, and also they're going to feel like that's expected of them, even if I've never said that explicitly, because I don't believe that. But so that's something that I think about. So scheduling emails. For me, it's really helpful actually to live with somebody else that I work with, and we both work out of our homes because I know when he's stopped working and he stops working and does other things. And so I feel like I want to join him. So that's one benefit. I don't necessarily recommend that to everyone else. But having someone like nudge you
Right.
is actually really helpful.
Right.
And excuse me. And then also being a little bit more realistic about what you can actually accomplish in a day. So I track,
Yes.
excuse me, I got a little something caught my throat.
No problem.
But being really realistic and tracking your time. And so I track all the things that I have to do, and then I compare it to like how much time is left in the day. So, with the goal of
Yep.
ending work at 5 or ending work at 6. And like yesterday, I was 2 hours behind, and I was like, I could either work 2 more hours and get this done, or just like move this task to another day so that I can stop working. So tracking time, setting an example, because I do think that even though we can help each other, hold each other accountable, like at the end of the day, like each individual person is really responsible for setting and maintaining those boundaries. And so that's important for me to remember as well. Like, you can only do so much, but each individual person needs to set and maintain
Right.
their own boundaries. And just bringing it into the conversation more, I think is also a really important way that we can have a large impact on that. What are some of the things that you do?
Yeah, I mean, I would line up with a lot of what you're saying right there. I'd say one thing that I found is we tried to set like working hours, but then we realized, okay, well, we have time zones that immediately just separates, on either end the range. And some people like to work later at night. Some people like to take a break during the day and then come back at night. So there wasn't like a good one size fits all approach to handling that.
Mhm.
What iteration we're in now is basically saying which tools are most appropriate for communication at certain times.
Mhm.
So rather than slacking everything, maybe email is actually better for this because it's a little less time sensitive, or maybe Asana if it's more task oriented, where people can kind of come back to it later and not feel that, that urge to have to get the red dot, cleared out. So yeah, I'd say it's a work in process. Whatever your policy is, though, it has to be flexible to accommodate time, working styles, and people just need to agree on which tools are appropriate for which pieces of communication. But yeah, I don't think there's one clear answer, but I like where you're going with it for sure. And I would just say, like, I think the most important thing that I heard you say was just, regardless of what you say, hey, you don't need to respond to this or whatever, people are still going to respond to your action. And so
Mhm.
anything that you can do to schedule emails or anything else, I think is crucial there for sure.
Yeah.
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 So let's talk about hiring for a second. So when people are thinking about hiring for a distributed team, what are some of the qualities that you think are crucial, if they're even different, from a normal kind of co-located employee model? Are there any kind of special superpowers that you look for in a remote worker?
Yes. So more so than in a co-located environment, I think that there are definitely some skills that are really critical in a remote worker. And if you are looking for someone who's going to perform quickly on your team, there are definitely things that you should look for. And one of those things is communication. And within that, I would say really proactive communication.
Mm.
So not waiting around for for someone to tell you what to do. Like as soon as you finish something, say, okay, I finished this. I'm not sure what to do with this. Where do I go next? And just not being afraid to connect with someone that you don't know that well, and say, okay, what's next? Or I found this issue. What should I do? Because if you're afraid and you just sit around and wait in a remote environment, you'll never get anything done. But I've worked with a lot of people who are like that.
Hmm.
And so that proactive communication is one of the most important things that a hiring manager can look for. And luckily, there are a lot of clues in the hiring process that can tell
Oh,
you whether, yeah, that can tell you whether someone is able to be proactive in that communication and then also in problem solving. So for instance, video connection issues. There's always going to be an issue. So if a candidate, you know, is like, okay, fine, like let's connect on Zoom, but what about a backup plan if technology doesn't work? Like that to me would say, okay, this person knows that
nice.
sometimes technology fails. They're being proactive about solving that problem ahead of time, and they've given real thought about making sure that that problem is solved immediately without having to waste time, valuable time on both sides. So that's just one example of
Mhm.
something that you would really want to look for in a remote teammate.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that. I think productivity is huge. Obviously, for any employee, you want them to be thinking ahead, but that lack of ability, I think, is compounded and amplified in a remote setting, right? It leaves you more vulnerable, I guess you could say.
Yeah, yeah. People who need their hand to be held through, you know, anything, are probably not going to be really well suited to remote work out of the gate. That's not to say that they can't learn,
Hmm.
um, or unlearn that behavior of like needing their hand to be held. I think because anything I think can be learned and people can train. Obviously, like that's our whole
Right.
reason for being, is believing that people can learn the skills that they need to be successful. But for a lot of hiring managers that are looking to bring someone on that can, you know, contribute immediately, those are the most important signs to look for.
That's really good. No, it's really good. And I think, a hiring manager needs to be actively looking for those things, not just evaluating skill set or culture fit, but yeah, deliberately looking for them. So it's really helpful. Let's zoom out for a second, because I know, I've heard you speak about this before, but it's just, let's talk about the future of work a little bit more. So not even necessarily in the distributed model or that transition, but as you think forward and as you look at what kind of work environment looks like moving forward, what are some of the trends that you're seeing? Like, what are some of the predictions or guesses that you have? We won't hold you to them, but as you're thinking about the future of work, hashtag future of work, where we see everywhere posted on LinkedIn, right? Like, what are some of the main trends or drivers or things that you're just excited about, within the landscape of how people work, how people find jobs, whatever it might be? It's dealer's choice.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I think the location flexibility would be the most interesting thing. I think, providing economic opportunity to more diverse groups who have
Mhm.
previously been excluded from the digital economy, to me, that's like the most exciting part of like why remote work is important, because it's great for like me to be able to work from home, sure, but I've also had the privilege of being really a part of that digital economy even since elementary school.
Mhm.
And so the ability to reach other populations that haven't had that opportunity, so like remote communities, that haven't really been part of this movement, are now able to be part of this movement because of, you know improvements in technology. And so that's the really really exciting piece. So right now, primarily who's working in remote work, it's like, it's pretty homogenous when you think about it. Like there's,
Yeah.
depending on the areas where you are in the industry, but it's, we all look pretty much the same.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true.
And so, and very similar, not just, in looks, but also in experience. So, college educated, middle class, middle to upper class. And
Mhm.
so what's really exciting to me is that the future of work will be more inclusive, because that is one of the things that remote work promises is, a more inclusive workforce. And we're not there yet. We're very far from that, but that's what I'm most excited to see.
It's funny. I forget, and a lot of folks who are listening to this forget too. When we live in large metro areas, you forget what it's like, maybe, or you don't know what it's like to live in small town America, where there might be one industry, one employer, not a huge variety of choice, and so there's a lot of, risk that comes with that. And you're right. This whole movement really flips that upside down.
Mhm.
Listen, I'd be remiss not to ask you about how this can impact refugees specifically. So can you talk to me a little
Mhm.
bit about what's going on there?
Yeah, so we're really excited to partner with Namal, which is an organization that is looking to upskill refugees, in order for them to have access to dignified employment. And that's a really exciting partnership that we just announced. And we are really excited to be their education partner. And so, we're looking to pilot that program to test this out and see what additional resources refugees might need in order to access those opportunities. But very related to what I was just talking about in terms of remote work finally being able to be accessible to more populations. I mean, refugees are definitely in that category because they have so many challenges and so many restrictions already keeping them from really achieving dignified employment, on a widespread basis. And so finding ways that we can relieve some of that burden on those individuals and feel and allow them to develop the skills that they need, as well as tap into the skills that they've already developed. I mean, that's a win-win-win situation for us. So we're really excited to partner with them all. I'm happy to send you, we just posted on our blog about that partnership, and we're looking for companies who can help sponsor to move the pilot forward.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm going to include that in the show notes for sure. So anybody who is listening or watching wants to be involved, you can find information, the links in this post. I love that. That's just an awesome initiative. So kudos to you guys for joining in. Listen, I guess what's one piece of advice? So let's just kind of, as we're wrapping up here, somebody who wants to make the transition, they're a founder, they're either starting from scratch or they're looking to make the transition. Like, what's one piece of advice you can give people to get started so they don't feel like this is just this insurmountable goal, right? Like, what's one thing that somebody can do like right now just to take that move?
Yeah, so we have a readiness assessment on our website, and we also offer the very first module of our Workplaceless program. And so that module captures all of the benefits and also the challenges of going remote. And so if somebody is feeling a little bit overwhelmed about like, okay, well, there's this information, there's that information, but like, what would I even do as my next step? We've laid out a framework, which we like to do, because one of the challenges is really not knowing what the next steps are. And that's really where education should come in, is providing those frameworks so that people can make those decisions and not feel so overwhelmed by the barrage of information that exists. So that's one of the very first things that somebody could do, would be to go through that content and take the readiness assessment. We give some advice on next steps at the end of that assessment, and that's something really concrete and something someone could do today.
It's fantastic. So we'll also link to that, make it easier for people to get to. But where can people find you? Where can people follow up, ask questions? I'll leave that in your court. If you want to give out your email, that might not be the best play, but it's up to you. Where can people find you and engage?
Yeah, they can find out more about Workplaceless at workplaceless.com. And then if they want, they can reach out on Twitter. I'm at Tammy Bjelland. And we'll have to spell that out because that's not an easy last name, but we'll put that in the show notes.
Yep, you got it. Awesome. Well, Tammy, thanks so much. You're super generous with your time. Love what you guys are doing. I can highly recommend just having had an inside look at some of the materials that you bring your clients through. Well worth it. Everybody who's listening to this should start with that assessment. In fact, I think we're probably going to be eating our own dog food and doing that ourselves here. Sweet. So thanks again for coming on, and I really appreciate your time.
Great. Thanks, Josh.
Take care.